Hello, this is Dan Dilzell, an attorney with Jackson & Jackson, and this is our Hurricane Watch Wednesday podcast. This is our latest Hurricane Watch Wednesday update, and it's particularly prescient in light of Hurricane Harvey and the flooding which has occurred in southeast Texas and now in southern Louisiana. But we think that although we've been dealing with catastrophic flooding, it's important to point out the gray area that can occur between flood damage and wind-driven rain coverage, and how insurance coverage is affected by the differences in those two types of damages. As we mentioned, Harvey is unfortunately giving us in the region flooding rains and catastrophic flooding, but it's still important to be aware of the differences between the two. And it's not as simple as just using the floodwater line to separate flood and wind-driven rain damage. In fact, the Louisiana Revised Statute 22-1893 specifically provides insurers cannot use the floodwater mark on a covered structure without considering other evidence when determining whether a loss is covered or not covered under a homeowner or wind policy. This is important for business owners to consider because business interruption coverage always falls under a wind policy, and in order to maximize their period of restoration coverage, insurers need to be able to identify and distinguish wind and wind-driven rain damage versus flood damage. Wind and wind-driven rain damage almost always occurs before the flood damage, and repair work that must be undertaken during a business's period of restoration can often be the same or similar regardless of the floodwater damage that comes later. When a business owner takes or an individual takes an initial steps after the storm damage, and that includes the separating of property, the listing of contents, identifying areas of structural damage, and then working with the flood and wind or business interruption adjusters, it's critical to identify the damage that was likely caused by wind and wind-driven rain versus flood. Roof damage, some examples of roof damage, broken windows, points of entry of water above the flood line are all examples of wind and wind-driven rain, which is non-flood damage. This evidence must be documented before any significant repair, renovation, or demolition work begins. Otherwise, an insured risks losing the evidence supporting that type of claim. In order to address these problems, or if any issues arise with regard to the distinction between the coverage and the often gray area that comes up, and the battle between insurance companies and what coverage they want to provide and what they don't want to provide, we would certainly suggest that you contact Jackson & Jackson, as we have extensive experience in this area over the last 12 years.